Welcome to Now Playing Podcast Book Reviews. From fiction to nonfiction, graphic novels, and more, we're here to help you find something great to read. We hope you enjoy the show.
Hello, readers. It's your host, Stuart, welcoming you back to Now Playing Book Review and back to the Dune-verse, author Frank Herbert's best-selling science fiction literary saga. My apologies for taking a little bit longer than expected to produce this podcast. Heretics of Dune is what we're talking about today. Hey, I thought it would be easy. I thought I could just crank through these next 471 pages and get it out to you lickety-split. After all, I've done 4 Dune book reviews already. I feel like I have a pretty good handle on this mythology. It won't be any trouble. And then I crack open the cover, and boy, am I quickly humbled looking at where Herbert is taking readers. No lie, halfway through my first attempt, I threw this novel across the room and just screamed, "What the hell is going on?" I, the long-term Dune fan, could not follow this narrative. And keep in mind, this is the first time I've read this book, whereas all the other ones I've had the advantage of having had years to contemplate them. But this one, I didn't even understand how, things would happen in one chapter and we jump somewhere else, and I couldn't even link up all of the action. There were so many new names, and I just had to take a deep breath. I had to just start over, read much more slowly than I'm used to, and just mapping everything. I had to write down all the names, connecting all the relationships. It added weeks to the proceedings. So I'm sorry about that, but I figured you'd want me to be able to be coherent. Better to be late than to have no idea what I'm talking about. And I do want to credit Frank Herbert. If there's a silver lining to all of this, he never turns in the same book twice, right? It is to his credit, his ingenuity, that he always wants the saga to progress. No cookie cutter. No doing what we did last time. Last time we had this worm that pretended to be a god, and this time worm is dead, all his slaves are breaking free, and everything is just scattered far beyond the known universe. That's the word they use. This time period is called the scattering. And I think scattered is a very good word to describe Book 5. Frank Herbert's prose, his plotting, is very fragmented. Just to give you an overview, we are 5,000 years beyond Book 1, 1,500 since the last book, and now we have to learn all new things. There are dozens of new characters. They're living on 3 different planets. Everyone is hatching a secret plot, and it takes hundreds of pages for them to even divulge what that plot is to you, the reader. So you got to work hard. You got to work as hard as you did when you picked up the very first Dune book. It never gets any easier. And again, I guess that's compliment to Frank Herbert, is that he asked so much of us. But I wasn't prepared. And I actually do think that Frank Herbert was feeling a bit scattered while he was writing this book. He was being paid the most money he ever had. The publishing house was very excited. The Dune trilogy had sold very well. God Emperor had surpassed expectations. And so, they wrote him a very big check to write Dune 5. And the irony is, it seems like Herbert wanted to do anything but. He kept turning in other books, things nobody was asking for throughout the early 80s. He's like, hey, how about this novel about a disease that kills only women? How about the 3rd installment of my Warship series? To which I say, huh? But apparently he's got another sci-fi series that doesn't have nearly the readership of Dune. But okay, he's going to write that 3rd book instead of Dune 5. And apparently he feels like American democracy is in peril and really needs him to write a manifesto. He actually starts raising money for a fellowship, a foundation to explore alternative forms of government, and is writing this thing about America needing to change. You should probably remember that Herbert was at one point a Republican speechwriter. And maybe when you read some of Dune, you see that come through about his thoughts on politics are deep and dense. And I guess he really felt like in 1983, we needed that. It would be interesting to know what he advised. Did he want Ronald Reagan to slip on a worm suit and plug the Golden Path rather than doing all those Morning in America ads? I don't know, because that never got finished. He didn't finish that polemic, but it's telling that he was giving that more priority than the book that he was paid a whole lot of money to write. It should also be said that Herbert was also hanging out with David Lynch a lot. You might not know that. I certainly didn't think of the movie as being from Frank Herbert, but he definitely was there shepherding the project of the Dune movie throughout its screenwriting phase. And Lynch wanted him there. He even offered a co-screenwriting credit, and Herbert begged off. He was like, no, this is your movie. I'm not going to do that. But he did put in a lot of time. He did show up on set. It was a further area where he was putting his energy when he could be writing that book. And, the thing that really, I think, impacted and delayed Dune 5 was that Beverly Herbert, his wife, this is when she begins losing her 10-year battle with breast cancer. Beverly is a woman that is very important to Frank. He deeply loves and admires her. She is the model for Lady Jessica, Paul's mother. You can see in those pages how much he loves that character. And Beverly had been there throughout the writing of all of these books. Their marriage had lasted decades, and she had offered valuable input and was always there with editorial notes, change this, do that. He listened to her. She cannot play that role for him as he's writing the 5th Dune book, and he really needs to be there for her. He is taking a lot of time to be home, to be her caregiver in her final months. And that just means he is not maintaining a regular writing schedule. The clock is ticking, the publishers want the book, and he is not able to focus on that. And so all of this sounds to me, anyway, like a recipe for a really bad book. Like, this is explaining why the Heretics of Dune, I'll just go ahead and share, is not up to snuff in terms of the Dune saga. You got an author, he's, first of all, just milking his biggest hit from 20 years ago for the 5th time because he wants a check, maybe because he doesn't, have ideas about where to go, but he's overtaxed, he's grieving, he's got no time to develop his ideas. And according to his son, Brian Herbert, who is writing this biography, Dreamer of Dune, that I'm reading in concurrence with the Dune novels, Frank was just not interested in critical feedback around this time. That both Brian and Beverly Herbert had come to him for some of those other books I mentioned earlier that he had written. They were like, this is a little bit unfocused. You should probably do that. Frank blew a gasket. He did not want them, at this point in time, telling them how to change his work. And so it's probably no surprise that when Beverly receives a draft of Heretics of Dune in June 1983, she's going to read it. She's going to tell her husband she loves it. It's her favorite of the series. Don't change a word. And then she's going to die peacefully 3 months later. And God bless her. I hope those last months were good for her. But I know she was lying. I just know that she said that because she did not want any conflict in her life. This book needs help. You read the first few chapters of Book 5, it's very clear that Herbert needed to work harder on explaining important plot details, better articulate the themes. In general, just do more to pull readers in, because it's not like we're in Dune anymore. I mean, I want to stress that, part of what makes this one the most difficult read is the playing field has changed so much. Herbert has always had Paul or Leto to give us focus. As complicated as any of his novels can be, the reader could always orientate by looking at what the Atreides leader was doing, be it teenage Paul rising to power in Book 1, or walking away from the throne in Book 2, or his son Leto picking up the pieces in Book 3, and then ruling over everything in Book 4. Those two really held it together. And so he could riff and he could go in different areas, and you always knew what was going on because of those two characters. And so R.I.P. Leto Atreides, right? God Emperor of Dune. You were a slimy son of a bitch, the worst kind of micromanager. You were a weird guy to follow for book 4, but your hentai-loving ass did provide the Dune-verse with a certain level of cohesion that just is going to be missing here with Heretics of Dune. Just naturally. Even if it was a great novel, it's going to be more scattered because we don't have Paul and Leto. They are both dead, and the author must continue on with a whole new set of characters. I'll compare this situation to pop music. You're Eddie Van Halen, and you've fired David Lee Roth and Sammy Hagar. You better be sure that you're giving Gary Cherone a catchy tune. He better be singing Jump. He better be singing Dreams. Right now, folks are not going to rock out to you just because you say, we're Van Halen. If you got a new singer and new sound, then you've got to work extra hard to convince and bring us along. And that's where Heretics of Dune stumbles. I think it gets lost in the new territory, trying to find a lead character that can belt out the old sound and give us something new as well. And what's frustrating is I know that Frank Herbert can do that. He pulled me into Dune, which had so many new weird characters. He has that talent to fix what's wrong with book 5. And if he had spent more time revising it, I'm confident the book is there. It just needs work. I see the elements in place. We'll talk about what I like, what I don't like. But, Beverly Herbert is no longer there to help. She had given her seal of approval before she died. The publisher is already ready to write a bigger check for Dune 6. There just was no motivation for Frank to slow down and work harder at this book. He thought he was done. And so now we must discuss Heretics of Dune. Overlong, a very uneven book that I'll, again, just going to preface by saying, to me, is easily the weakest of the 5. I actually want to read you the back cover. I picked up this copy after I threw it across the room. I was just like, how would you even sell people on what's happening here? And who's the poor copywriter that's got to write this blurb on the back? How would you describe this story to someone that doesn't know? And so here we go. This might be our way into talking about everything here. Quote, "The planet Arrakis, now called Rakis, is becoming desert again." Okay, I got that. Next sentence. Quote, "The lost ones are coming home from the far reaches of space." All right. Don't know what lost ones are. Sounds intriguing. Something bad's coming. Gotcha. Quote, "The sandworms are dying." Actually, I thought they were already dead. Leto was the last sandworm, but we'll talk about that in a minute. All right, going on. Quote, "And the children of Dune's children awaken from empire as if from a dream, wielding the new power of a heresy called love." What is that word salad you just called a sentence? I don't even know what that means. I hear that this is the generation after Children of Dune. We're actually several generations beyond them. Okay, so they're beyond, they awaken from empire. They don't have God Emperor anymore, but wielding a new power of a heresy called love, this explains why I don't know what's going on in this book. It gets back to my whole notion that Herbert's themes are messy and muddy. We're going to tackle it. But I think probably what's wisest to do is just dial it back a bit, go to the end of book 4. I didn't really go into detail about it last podcast because I want people to read it. I don't like spoiling the ends of books. I try not to do that on any show. I'm not going to tell you the ending of book 5 here. But now that I feel like you've had your chance to read book 4, it's fair game. We saw wormy God Emperor Leto and his human sweetheart, Huey Nori. They were headed to the chapel and they were going to get married, right? They were going to knock boots and who knows what, make babies. I don't know what the wedding plans were, but there is a beloved servant up on the hillside, and as they are crossing a bridge, they fire a laser, and it should be said, they're acting on orders from Leto's terrorist great-great-grandniece, Siona Atreides, the sort of nemesis for Leto throughout much of that novel. They blow up this bridge. They send both bride and groom tumbling into a river. The bride is dead instantly, and God Emperor's worm melts in water. Remember, sandworms do not like water. And so he explodes, and he has inside of him all of these sand trout, which, if you remember from the last podcast, in the life cycle of a sandworm, sand trouts come before. They're the things that drink water. They're in a river now. They're going to swarm through the planet, and they are going to turn Arrakis's green paradise back into a desert. All of Leto's hard work, the dream of Liet Kynes and the Freemen to live in a planet that, wasn't made of dust and sand, where they could grow their own food. It seemed like this was paradise, and how crazy it is. Gone with the worm is all I could think of. Gone with the worm. With Leto's passing, so too is the dream of Arrakis as a paradise. And here's something even weirder. Leto knew all of this was going to happen. This was not a surprise. Leto, God Emperor, can see the future. And so he really wanted, is that the right word? He wanted this to happen. I do feel like he was ready. I guess what I was sensing from him was the human within inside the worm felt like it was time to pass the torch. And what he was trying to do, what I heard in his many monologues, was that he was trying to find a way to keep people on the golden path without enslaving them. He knew that the worm had done wrong, that by taking away people's ability to take care of themselves, by addicting them to spice and then being the only spice supplier, he really had them bowing and degraded. And so he knew that needed to come to an end. He does want the best for people. And so his worm body exploding in the water is supposed to be mankind's, initiative, creativity exploding into the universe. He thinks with himself taken out of the picture, mankind is going to scatter. They're going to leave their known universes. They're not going to have their spice, and they're going to go and search for new meaning, new ways of being. They will be now self-sufficient. They are going cold turkey from what he provided, and they will flourish as he turns everything back to the way that it was. Bene Talaxio, Bene Gesserit, Ixians, they're all going to travel through time and space, presumably finding their full potential. And I use that word presumably because I don't know that I ever understood Leto's Golden Path, to be honest. For all the words that he gave to it, the whole concept remains rather nebulous. What I hear him saying, if I'm hearing it correctly, is that there's a correct way to live. That the Golden Path is a person living to their highest potential. And the paradox of all of that is you want people to choose that for themselves. If you chain people to that golden path and they walk that golden path because they're stuck on it, that is not good enough. You have to remove the tyrant worm. The God Emperor has to take himself out of the equation, and hopefully, I think through conditioning, he figures if I make people live a certain way for 3,000 years, they're going to keep living that way when I'm gone. I also heard some lip service about fixing the problem of prescience, that his future seeing is actually a problem. When people know what the future holds, they're going to get bored, they're going to get rebellious, they're going to defy the vision, they're going to step off the golden path, if for no other reason than that's just human nature to defy prophecy. I'm just not going to do what you want from me. And so he has to remove that from the equation. And specifically, what I heard him saying was that Terrace Siona Atreides was someone he never could see in all his future visions. Part of what made her interesting was that she seemed to have this quality that might be genetic. And if you breed her, say with my Duncan, Idaho clone, that eventually we'll have a future generation that no future seer will be able to predict. And that is, I guess, the magic recipe. We have people following a golden path, expanding into the universe to be self-actualizing, and never feeling imprisoned by characters that claim to see the future. But I don't know. That's some neurotic thinking, right? I can see why God Emperor wanted to die. If I had to rule that way, if I had to keep all of that in mind, it's taking on too much personal responsibility. You are trapped by your own visions. I guess I'm just of the attitude, let humanity be free. Like, ruling doesn't have to be that controlling. Who cares if they're on a golden path or not? You as a ruler set the agenda. I guess I'm just more of a low-key person. Netflix and chill. That would be my rule. Like, just everyone go do your thing. But it is the world that we've inherited. It should just be said, whether we would rule like Leto or not, his choice to do this has set up Book 5. We are now dealing with the consequences of a universe that was addicted to spice and now has really no access. I think he has some stored away in warehouses. They can still do some of it. Eventually, I believe it is the Ixians do invent an artificial spice. I don't know how well that works, but I hear some lip service given to that here in Book 5. But for the most part, people are going to have to do something different. And I do have a problem with cold turkey as an approach. I mean, I do think when you're thinking about addiction, the idea that you've hooked people for all these years and then you cut them off and expect them to flourish. Imagine if I had a bunch of runners and I chained them to a bed and fed them drug for, let's just say, even a couple months. If I suddenly cut off their shackles and said, go run a marathon, do you think anyone's going to cross that finish line? I mean, the more likely scenario is their legs atrophied, they've forgotten how to walk. All I have prepared them to do is stumble, fall, and die. And that, to me, again, is the failure, the word I feel confident about. Whatever God Emperor's intentions were, he failed to deliver to the people a path forward in which they would flourish. And they are not flourishing here in Book 5. It is kind of a hot mess when you look at Heretics of Dune and the politics 1,500 years later. So let's just start with Arrakis. Again, they've changed the name. It's now just Rakis, which sounds way more fly, right? I should just do that with everything. Just remove the first syllable. Don't call me Stuart anymore. I'm Art. I'm Art, and I'm going to Arrakis. Anyway, it's not really a new planet. It is the planet that we knew from Book 1, because the Leto sand trout have gone in 1,500 years and sucked all the water out. All that greenery is gone. And so now what is going down on Arrakis? Like, what is going to be the problem now that we've come full circle? Frank Herbert, I feel like, has been so eloquent and forward-thinking every step of the way as this planet transformed. How is he going to see our return to desert societies? What is the biggest challenge that is going to be faced by people post-worm? Is it the lack of spice? Are they warring with each other? Is there some new leader coming up? Well, believe it or not, the scourge of the year 5000 is space whores. You heard me right. The lost ones that the book jacket talked about are actually whores from space who are wanting to do all kinds of kinky things with you and imprint their nastiness on you and are coming for you. Which makes me feel like this book needed a better title, right? Like maybe Herbert should have gone with Sluts of Dune, not Heretics of Dune. Something really to just put it out there, because that is what this book is about. Now, I exaggerate a little. Whores is the term that the Bene Gesserit use to put down these lost ones. But there is a loose order of women. I'll be charitable. I'm going to use their preferred name. Honored Mattress. They're described. That's M-A-T-R-E-S, which sounds a lot like the Spanish word for mother, madres. Maybe they're honored mothers. I'm honored to see you, ma. Stop doing that kinky sex stuff. Or maybe it sounds like mattress, which, again, you're going to have an honored night with them. Either way it works, because there's a real Madonna whore complex thing happening in these pages. Mama's going to take you to bed. Honored Matres are actually Bene Gesserit. They're the descendants of them. They left the sisterhood 1,500 years ago at the start of the scattering. When God Emperor Leto died and there was this spice famine, there were some Bene Gesserit that said, let's go find what's out there. Let's do what he asked. And they lose contact with the sisterhood. We don't know what they've been doing all of this time. They evolved. And history teaches us this all the time. When people migrate great distances, even though they're taking culture with them, it will change. Think of the Pilgrims, they didn't want monarchy. They left England. They came to a new world and met new people. And suddenly they are talking, acting, thinking in different ways. And so that's the way I see the Honored Matres. But the Bene Gesserit believe that they are not pioneers, that they are perverts, that they have bastardized the time-honored rituals involving genetic manipulation and the birthing program. So one Reverend Mother describes it thusly. I'm just going to quote what she says. These so-called Honored Matres combine sexual ecstasy and worship. They ape some of our ways, but they have none of our deeper awareness. They dare to place themselves at the center of worship. End quote. And here's the really important part. Now they're coming home and they're expecting the Bene Gesserit to adopt their ways or die. Turn slut or we're at war. I don't know. Maybe the prospect of space whores is really scary to you, but I'm thinking, okay, boomer, check the mirror. Bene Gesserit sisters have been creating phony religions to subjugate powerful men for centuries. You've done all kinds of things. You've made terrible, immoral, eugenic decisions about who can live and die. But now that a younger, prettier, more assertive type of sisterhood is rolling into town, you want to click your tongue and judge and be so prudish. I just want to say, don't pretend like you don't want the same thing. You're both going for the beads off the Mardi Gras float. It's just the new girls are willing to hike up their skirt. And you hate them for it. It makes me think more critically of the Bene Gesserit, frankly, than quivering at the Honored Matres. I'm also reminded in this moment that Frank Herbert is a 64-year-old writer. He had very progressive ideas about ecology and government per the 1960s, but he is no hippie. He came before that, and in fact, some of his ideas about their notions on sexual revolution and feminism are very contrary to that. He does support patriarchy, if you look at all the other Dune books. And so even though Book 5 here is going to pivot away from the Letos and the Pauls and the masculine House Atreides and make women the central figures, I do think it's telling that the sisterhood we're supposed to like is the one that makes sensible choices and about marriage and babies, and the villains, well, they just want to screw everything and use their looks to be the center of attention. Call the Honored Matres whores if you must, Bene Gesserit, but you look like straight up pimps when I get a look at what you're doing to obtain power here in Heretics of Dune. It's not surprising that they have taken back all of their matchmaking duties. Remember, God Emperor Leto took that all away. They were essentially powerless last novel, and now they're trying to, consort and choose babies, and I guess I shouldn't be surprised about this, but I am. They want to breed a 15-year-old boy with a 13-year-old girl. So trigger warning, folks, modern readers, you need to know the bulk of Heretics of Dune is about statutory rape and grown women imprinting, that's the word that's used, imprinting themselves on a virginal boy as well as a 300-year-old man. Yes, that it's all about taking a boy's virginity away and preparing him for the life, marriage, breeding that the Bene Gesserit want him to do. Which, sidebar, what is up with all this perverted sex in this book? What is going on with Frank? Does he think he's writing a sequel to Flowers in the Attic? This is Dune. I know that they've made some weird choices about mating in the past, but this one feels extra pervy and kinky. And I just laugh about that copywriter. How do you describe this to people? I go back to the quote, wielding the new power of a heresy called love. I like Sluts of Dune better. Let's be honest. But anyway, this is the situation. I guess readers aren't supposed to be offended by this taboo sexuality because the children at the center of all this are connected to classic Dune characters who have screwed each other in other books. Our star-crossed underage lovers are essentially the second coming of Duncan Idaho and Siona Atreides, who was the couple that God Emperor Leto wanted to bring together in Book 4. So let's take a closer look at each of them, their backgrounds, why it might be a good idea for these two to hook up, see if your skin stops crawling. I'll start with the girl. Her name is Shiana, and she's introduced as an 8-year-old orphan wandering alone in the Arrakis desert after sandworms have destroyed her village and killed her parents and everyone she knows. And DNA testing is going to confirm that Shiana is a direct descendant of the terrorist Siona Atreides from Book 4. But that alone, I don't think, would be a reason for the Bene Gesserit to care about her. In fact, many people in the Dune-verse in the year 5000 hold a very low opinion of anyone with the Atreides name because of the way God Emperor Leto Atreides enslaved them. They are resentful. They hate that worm. But fortunately for Shiana, she finds some people that love that worm. She finds an order of priests who are operating a church on Arrakis, who are still trying to keep up God Emperor Leto's ways. And so they start worshiping this child too, once they realize that she can telepathically communicate with sandworms. They follow her commands like trained dogs, which nobody else can do that trick. Anyone that steps out into those sands is going to be eaten by the worm. But Shiana, she can tell them to stop, she can tell them off, she can even climb on the back of a worm and get rides around the planet like the Fremen used to do. Side note, I don't think there are any more Fremen. I think they went extinct, or maybe she is a descendant of Fremen and Atreides. I don't know. But anyway, nobody's seen any of that kind of Fremen characteristic behavior with worms in this year 5000. And so she seems like a god. It never gets explicitly said why she has this power, but I believe you got to keep in mind that all worms now are descendants of Leto. At the end of Book 4, again, no worms anywhere but Leto. Leto explodes into sand trout. Every sand trout basically grows into a sandworm and retains perhaps a little bit of his Leto-ness, his consciousness. These are essentially little Letos. I mean, it's not like God Emperor. They don't have physical attributes of a human being. They can't talk. They don't have a face, a human face, but they are essentially enough of Leto that if he meets someone that's a direct descendant of Siona, he's going to take a shine to them. He's going to listen to them. And that is why she seems to be this worm whisperer. And of course, the Bene Gesserit are going to want to get involved with someone like that, because their whole thing is that they invent religions to control people. So Shiana has already done the hard work for them. She already has a whole priesthood saying she's a goddess. And so now the Bene Gesserit say, recruit her. You know, there's talk about making her a reverend mother, breeding her, exploiting her celebrity. Now, I'm not normally drawn to stories of child grooming, but I will say this scenario is actually really juicy because it's actually creating rifts within the Bene Gesserit sisterhood. Reverend Mother Superior, her name is Taraza. She is the one saying we need to breed this child, we need to use this child, but there are a lot of people underneath her that are afraid. You know, they want to betray her. There will be one that actually defies her. And I think that's where some of the title means, that one of the heretics of Dune is someone that won't listen to her Mother Superior. And I get the fear. I mean, as much as the Bene Gesserit say they hate Leto, they should never forget that it's their fault he came into power, right? The chain of events was Book 1, they tried to breed Harkonnen and Atreides bloodlines to make this magic boy child called the Kwisatz Haderach to be their proxy. But oops, instead of breeding a pushover emperor that would do anything they say, they made a worm that enslaved humanity for millennia. And will that happen again now that they are breeding Shiana? And not just breeding a Shiana, it should be said, they are breeding her with another iconic member of House Atreides, fabled warrior Duncan Idaho. Yes, believe it or not, it's crazy to me, but Jason Momoa's character is still thriving 4 books after he was killed in Dune. You'll remember in book 2, he was resurrected as a clone who became the boyfriend of Paul's sister Alia. And then in book 3, when she turned evil, he ends up killing himself. And Leto really liked him. That Paul's son didn't have that much time with him, but I guess liked him enough that he kept ordering him up. In book 4, God Emperor just says, I want a Duncan. He would order Duncan Idahos by the dozen. Like they were Dunkin' Donuts. Duncan Idahos would come to him to be his advisor, his entertainer, his security team. And then, God Emperor Leto is dead. 1,500 years have passed. And a new Duncan is commissioned with the express purpose of mating with Shiana. The Bene Gesserit Mother Superior believes that is a powerful match. Here's where it gets really confusing, as if this plot isn't already hard to get your fingers on. The Bene Gesserit don't make clones. When they're manipulating the gene pool, they're making babies the old-fashioned way. It is a rival faction of dwarf people called the Bene Tlaxu, which I think I've mentioned a few times. They serviced Leto with the Duncans. They had the machine technology that no one is supposed to use. The Sisterhood has since bought that technology, but the dwarves are mad. They don't like the fact when they get wind of this plot that they're breeding Duncans, they start whacking Duncans. They don't want this thing to sexually mature. And so even by the start of book 5, we are to understand that the Bene Gesserit have tried 11 times to make a sexually functioning Duncan Idaho, and every time a Bene Tlaxu assassin will shoot a poison dart or stab him or whack him in some way. I'm not even really sure what they have against Jason Momoa, other than maybe they saw Aquaman, but this is a rivalry. That's important to understand. Bene Tlaxu versus Bene Gesserit. And what it really means is that the sisters have to grow Duncan number 12 in secret. They have to find a place where no dwarf will find them. They have chosen the Harkonnen planet Giedi Prime, which is now called Gamu, because everything in this book has a name change. It drives me crazy. This is, again, why I had to read this book twice. We're on Arrakis, not Arrakis. We're on Gamu, not Giedi Prime. Do you know how hard it was just to remember it the first time? And now you're going to change everything on me? Man. Anyway, let me just sum up everything that I've described, because I've essentially told you the bulk of this book. Most of what happens in these nearly 500 pages is that the Bene Gesserit are preparing Duncan number 12 on Gamu to meet Shiana on Arrakis without space whores and dwarves killing the children. That is the plot. And then to make it extra fun and confusing, the Bene Tlaxu dwarves have these shape-shifting slaves called face dancers that can look like anything that they want. And they're going around and killing off and impersonating powerful honored matres and Bene Gesserit women, so that you're never even sure that the character you just met, whether it's their authentic self or an evil copy. Lots of deceptions, very high on assassination plots and conspiracy this time. So much so that my head was spinning. I mean, is yours just listening to this? I feel like I'm talking crazy even trying to parse out this plot. You get why it would be difficult to keep all these elements straight in your head in a first-time read. And again, Frank Herbert is not at his best in writing this. He could have done more. His fix is, he knows that this is a lot to juggle. And so his fix is something that I don't really like. But what he thinks will help is if every character we meet here, even though they have a different name and association, that they'll be copies of classic Dune characters. Like Shiana is just basically Siona from book 4. And obviously we've got a new Duncan, and as soon as he gets laid, he will have the memories of the first Duncan and access all his ancestral memories and be exactly like he was in book 1. The head of security for the Bene Gesserit, he's this Atreides war hero named Miles Tegg, and every single character will walk by and say, hey, you look exactly like Duke Leto from book 1, and talk about Duke Leto and him and all the connections. Frank basically thinks that we're going to have this carryover goodwill and empathy if all the characters are clones of his past success. And that will somehow carry us through this dense, difficult novel. It reminds me of a scam, the way they used to hawk sham perfumes back in the 80s. If you have knowledge of this, they used to have these perfume boxes that would advertise, if you like Calvin Klein's Obsession, you'll love Restraining Order. If you like opium, you'll love Cracked House. I mean, the reason why you love them, by the way, they're knockoff perfumes that have the same ingredients. I guess you couldn't copyright the smell. They smell the same, but they're about, $25, $30 cheaper than the name brand. And I see Herbert making that claim again and again throughout Heretics of Dune. He's like, if you like Paul's mom, Lady Jessica, you'll adore another red-headed Bene Gesserit with some Atreides family ties fighting the head of her sisterhood, just like Jessica did. But we don't. I mean, maybe you will. I'll offer that. Maybe you will like seeing characters reborn. I did not enjoy it. I found it lazy, and I think this read just helped me understand I don't come to Dune for heroics. I'm not here to see Paul ride the worm. I'm not here to see Leto put on the sand trout suit and hop around like a superhero. I like the substance. I feel like Frank Herbert is a really smart thinker, philosopher. I'm wanting to dig into the themes. And so last podcast, all I was doing was talking about monarchy and how leaders make choices and sacrifices to stay in power. What is there to dig into here with Heretics of Dune? I see one and only one theme. I see an author very concerned about legacy. And it makes sense. Again, keep the perspective. My wife is dying. My own health is failing. Frank Herbert will be dead in 3 years from writing this 5th book. He looks at his children. He's disappointed at some of their choices. He's wondering, will they uphold my values after I'm gone? He's hovering over the shoulder of David Lynch to ensure that his book is going to be exactly like that movie. Surprise, it's not. But he tried. He tried to make it so because he knew that the movie could outlast the book, that more people might be reached by that movie. And so he's wanting to keep his ideas, his legacy, his values front and center. And that's true of the children in this story. You've got a novel where the whole point is a bunch of children are being shuttled around and being told again and again they have to live up to these crazy expectations. You gotta be like people born thousands of years ago. You gotta screw each other because that will be good for future matches. You gotta follow some kind of golden path that nobody really understands. And don't you ever follow any women's movement that is too sexually provocative and outspoken. I have some sympathy, Frank Herbert. I understand. I'm reaching middle age myself. I have had on more than one occasion the sad realization that the things I value and treasure are already being lost to time. I look at today's politics. I get scared. What is America going to be after our generation is gone? I don't know how to hope for the future, but here's one thing I do know. It won't be all bad. And unfortunately, what I see in this story is basically that everything coming out of that scattering, everything that Leto set up, that people would go out into the universe and change themselves, they are the threat. They are the threat to the old way of life and the villains of the story. Look, we can't live in the past. Arrakis should not go back into being a desert planet. I want to scream Herbert's own words at him. You must not fear. Fear is the mind killer. Fear is the little death that kills your novel when you take a curmudgeonly stance against cultural change and sexually confident women. So maybe I'm the heretic of Dune because this is probably where I would get off the worm. I don't want to read any more of this saga. I have really enjoyed the first 4 novels. I really did not enjoy this novel. I know that there's a lot here in detail work that I can appreciate. I'll share this. if you are someone that has been wondering about supporting characters, Heretic Dune is going to scratch that itch a lot. I feel like the Bene Gesserit were always very secretive. We didn't know much about them. This is the book where we really understand about how they wield power. I think there's this one character that's really fascinating. She's a sister who, for a brief period of time, she lived with a foster mother that was not Bene Gesserit, who showed her love. And that makes her different than any other Bene Gesserit, because the thing about Bene Gesserit training is you only reserve the emotion of love as a tool of manipulation. No one should just be comforted with love. It is a way to get power. And so it makes this one woman more defiant. She is capable of caring and empathizing in ways that the rest of her sisterhood cannot. And that's a really good conflict. Boy, I wish that this book explored more of those kind of psychological ideas, because I know, again, Frank Herbert has done that before. I could be really into this weird, kinky new Dune-verse had it been framed correctly. But the choppy writing, again, so many concepts don't make sense. I kid you not, almost nothing happens for 400 pages, and then incredible things happen in the last 50 pages. Like, you can't even believe. It's almost like an editor called up Frank and said, "We need the book tomorrow." And he went, "Oh," and typed out something really fast. It's a badly written book. I did not enjoy soaking in the spice this time. So this is my first not recommend for the series. But I am going to continue on. I am going to read book 6. Why wouldn't I? It's the last book Frank Herbert is ever going to turn in. I want to know how it shakes up. I've gone this far. I'm going to honor my commitment to do all 6 Dune-verse novels. And who knows? There is reason to believe, with the way things get shook up, Chapter House Dune is going to be another radical reinvention. It's very clear by the end of this, again, not spoiling the end of this novel, that Arrakis will never be the same. And that these new characters, as clumsy as it has been to introduce them, now that I know who they are, I presume that we're not going to jump 3,000 years into the future. We're going to stay with these new characters, and it will be easier to follow them through Chapter House Dune, which is the name of the last Dune-verse novel we will be covering here at Now Playing Book Review. And so, in conclusion, I hope you've taken something out of my evaluation of this material. I hope it hasn't depressed you that I wasn't a bigger fan of this. I tried, believe me. But I appreciate that you are here and that you are still listening and that you keep reading. And always, thank you for supporting Now Playing Book Review.
Thank you for listening to Now Playing Podcast Book Reviews. We hope you've enjoyed this podcast. In the archives at nowplayingpodcast.com, you can find more than 150 more book reviews, including many of the works of Stephen King, the Ian Fleming Bond books, the Planet of the Apes novels, Frank Miller's The Dark Knight Returns, and many more. This episode of Now Playing Podcast Book Reviews is copyright 2024, Venganza Media Incorporated, all rights reserved. And no part of this show may be reproduced, repurposed, redistributed, or modified without the express permission of Venganza Media Incorporated.